So let's just work the grey around his eye carefully. So we lose that white circle there. Remember, just keep the highlight of the eye. That's better. I've also darkened his beak with the black mix. I've just given it a second coat just to deepen that up a little bit. Okay, so let's move on now to the shadow beneath his wing. We want a mix here of, I think what we'll do is we'll paint it first of all in, let's mix up some grey, it's coming out. We'll paint it firstly in ultramarine blue, and then we'll come in and darken up certain areas of that with the black. So if I just wet this, can you see it on the screen? Oh, that's better. So I'm picking up some ultramarine blue now on my brush. Okay. Oh, that's good. And just want to wet the area that I'm going to paint because I don't want a hard line here. Let's just have a soft line. So it's just going to place a line of water all the way down, here, so that when we place that ultramarine blue, it'll be softened by that water line without too much trouble. And then a little bit also coming in under the wing there. So you want to wet a little bit lower down than where you're going to put the paint, because you want that paint to have somewhere to go. So this is just the ultramarine blue, and I'm creating a shadow all the way down the side of the bird here. And I'm going to use my damp brush first of all, just to soften off that line a little bit. And then I'm going to wash my brush off and go into the grey, pick up a little bit of that grey and dot it down along that line to let it spread with some of that blue paint that we just put down. So I'm just taking off the excess now. I'm dragging, let's pick a tiny bit more, just dragging this down that section of the tail as well. Okay, and now I've not got so much on my brush, I'm going to come up to this section of the wing and just put a nice line in there, which I can soften with my damp brush. Having looked at it again, it's still damp and I want to work on it a little bit more. I want to drag some of that blue into underneath, so picking up some more ultramarine and placing it down and just wetting a little bit lower on the bird. I really want to bring some of it underneath here. So I'm just dabbing it onto the surface, allowing that to blend in with some of the paler blues that are down there. It's going to give us a little bit more definition. We can kind of come in and draw some little strokes like we did on the head, just to make it look like there are some little fluffy sort of feathers along here. Flicking out in that section. And he is quite fluffy under there, so I can also clean that brush off thoroughly, and we can pull out some slightly lighter areas as well. So picking up some of that wet paint, and we can pull out what look like little feathers. Just by rubbing on the surface there, and using some of that paint. So we've got some texture now there building up quite nicely. And I'm just going to come in with some more grey and really sharpen up this edge here. It's lost a little bit of its sharpness from being wet, so I just want to make sure that edge is nice and crisp. We can now look at the white in the side of his wing there, basically mixing that very pale grey that we used to work on the side of his face, and just damping down, first of all, just damping down the centres of those shapes with a clean wet brush, and then popping on just a little bit of that grey, just to give it something, a bit of shadow cast. I've also used a very, very pale blue just to tone down those white stripes in his flight wings there, which has just toned it down a little bit. They were way too bright before. And next we'll have a look at popping in his feet, and then also the branch that he's sitting on as well. So let's have a look at his little feet there. I'm just using the ultramarine blue to begin with, nice and pale, just to put some colour on there. Let's get that out of the way. And again, I'm dragging the paint towards me. I'm not wetting his feet and legs. I'm just going to paint this pale blue onto the dry paper. And they're quite vicious looking claws actually when you paint them at this size. And if you turn yourself around just so that you can see the detail of where you're painting, because you know these are quite small areas, and I haven't drawn them in particularly dark, so it can get tricky. If you do get stuck on anything like this, the finer details, it's always good to go back to your reference image. Just going to use a little bit of water in here and just pull the colour down and into his toe, and as it curls around that claw there, gripping onto the branch. Okay. So that's the one foot just painted in. This is just the wash. And I'm doing the same. You can just see it under here. Part of his foot and claw curling round. This one is in shadow, so we will be painting it quite dark. What we'll do is we'll go into the grey now that we have mixed and just dab that over the top, just to darken it off. And then with this foot, we've got some, just going to wet this area with some water. It's quite dark on the leg itself, so I'm going to go into the grey paint and just dab some of that on. And then his foot is quite light in some spots, so what I'm going to do actually is remove a little bit. It's a clean brush. Let's just take off some of this blue here by rubbing with a damp brush and tapping the paper towel over the top, pressing down. Just going to remove a little bit of that colour because actually it's fairly light there. If it's going to, it's probably, no, it's not going to allow me to do it. I mean, again, these paints aren't what I'm used to, unfortunately. These are a different quality and they don't behave the same. So I've not been able to lift that off, but never mind. What I'll do instead is use some water and wet each toe one at a time and just apply the sort of the shadows, the darker bits, just with a bit of grey, and hopefully that will be like removing highlights. You'll just see the pale blue as a highlight then. A little bit darker here. There. And then there's some shadow just underneath. Okay. There are some sharp kind of crisper lines, but we'll let this dry first before we do that. So I'm going to wet this other toe now. Hope you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just wetting that toe, and then I'm going to come in with some grey just to place the shadows on. And there's a little bit of a shadow down here as well. And that side of the toe. Okay. And I'll just wet the top toe next, because the other one overlaps with this one I've just painted and I don't want it to mix, if you like. I want to have a little bit of control with where I'm applying the shadows. And if I touch water against water, it'll all blend together. You tend to lose control of it. And what happens? So we'll let those dry, and then I'll come in that middle toe and sort the shadows out on that one. Just darkening up this claw here. That looks good.